Number the signal in the static. The November rain drummed against the concrete walls of the underground communications bunker, each drop adding to the symphony of white noise that filled Lieutenant Sarah Martinez's world. She sat hunched over the massive radio console, her practiced fingers moving across dials and switches with the precision of a concert pianist. The greenish glow from the vacuum tubes cast eerie shadows across her face as she monitored multiple frequency bands simultaneously. Sarah had been stationed at this remote military communications facility for 8 months now, intercepting and relaying messages between field units and command headquarters. The work was methodical, often tedious, but she understood its critical importance to ongoing operations. Tonight felt different, though. There was an electricity in the air that had nothing to do with the storm raging overhead. The clock on the wall showed 2,347 hours as Sarah began her routine equipment check. She methodically tested each radio set, ensuring optimal reception and transmission capabilities. The facility housed 12 different communication systems, each tuned to specific military frequencies and designed to maintain contact with units scattered across 3 different theaters of operation. As she worked, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this isolated posting. Growing up in rural Montana, she had developed an early fascination with radio technology. Her grandfather, a former Navy radioman from World War II, had taught her the basics of radio operation during long summer visits to his ranch. Those childhood lessons had blossomed into a passion that eventually led her to enlist and specialize in military communications. The training had been intense. Months of learning not just the technical aspects of radio operation, but also the critical skills of signal analysis, encryption protocols, and battlefield communications management. Sarah had excelled, graduating at the top of her class and earning assignment to this high-security facility that coordinated communications for special operations units. Her fellow operators respected her expertise, but Sarah often felt isolated by the secretive nature of their work. The messages they handled were classified, the units they supported operated in dangerous territories, and the consequences of communication failures could mean the difference between life and death for soldiers in the field. It was a heavy responsibility that weighed on her shoulders every shift. Tonight, she was working alone. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had called in sick, and Corporal Jenkins was on leave, leaving Sarah to monitor all 12 radio sets by herself. She didn't mind the solitude. In fact, she often preferred working alone, as it allowed her to fully concentrate on the subtle nuances of radio signals that others might miss. The first radio set crackled with routine traffic between a forward observation post and their artillery support unit. Standard coordinates and timing information flowed back and forth in the clipped, professional tones that characterized military communications. Sarah logged the transmissions and moved on to the next frequency. Radio 2 carried diplomatic communications between the embassy and various government agencies back home. Nothing unusual there either, just routine administrative traffic and status updates. Radio 3 was dedicated to air traffic control for military aircraft operating in the region, with controllers coordinating flight paths and landing schedules with mechanical precision. As Sarah continued her rounds, she noticed that Radio 7 was experiencing some interference. This particular set was tuned to a frequency used by reconnaissance units operating deep in contested territory. The static was heavier than usual, and occasional bursts of what sounded like foreign language transmissions bled through from adjacent frequencies. She adjusted the tuning slightly, trying to clean up the reception. The reconnaissance teams relied on clear communications for their survival, and any degradation in signal quality could compromise their missions. Sarah had developed a reputation for her ability to optimize radio performance under difficult conditions, often managing to maintain communications when others had given up. The interference seemed to be coming from atmospheric conditions caused by the storm. Radio waves could behave unpredictably during severe weather, bouncing off charged particles in the atmosphere and creating unexpected propagation patterns. Sarah had seen this phenomenon before, but tonight the distortion seemed more pronounced than usual. She decided to perform a more thorough analysis of the interference pattern. Using a spectrum analyzer connected to Radio 7, she began mapping the various signals that were bleeding into their frequency. Most appeared to be natural atmospheric noise, But there were some structured patterns that caught her attention. Radio operators developed an almost supernatural ability to distinguish between different types of signals. Natural interference had certain characteristics, while human-generated transmissions, even heavily distorted ones, retained underlying patterns that trained operators could recognize. Sarah's instincts were telling her that something in the static wasn't quite right. She isolated one particular burst of interference and ran it through several filters, trying to extract any intelligible content. The process was painstaking, requiring her to adjust frequency settings, modify gain controls, and experiment with different demodulation techniques. Most operators wouldn't have bothered with such a detailed analysis for what appeared to be simple atmospheric interference. But Sarah's grandfather had taught her that radio operators were part technician and part detective. Every signal told a story, and sometimes, the most important stories were hidden in the places where nobody thought to look. His wartime experiences had included several instances where seemingly random radio noise had revealed enemy communications, leading to intelligence breakthroughs that affected entire campaigns. As she worked, Sarah became increasingly convinced that the interference contained structured information. The bursts were too regular, too patterned to be purely natural phenomena. She began recording the signals for later analysis while continuing to monitor the primary communications traffic that was her primary responsibility. The clock showed 0130 hours when Sarah finally achieved a breakthrough. Using a combination of narrowband filtering and signal processing techniques, she managed to extract a faint but audible voice transmission from within the static. The speaker was using a language she didn't immediately recognize, but the tone and cadence suggested military communications. Her heart rate increased as she realized she might have stumbled onto something significant. Foreign military communications bleeding into their frequency could indicate several possibilities. None of them good. Enemy forces might be operating closer to their position than intelligence reports suggested, or atmospheric conditions might be allowing distant transmissions to propagate much further than normal. Sarah quickly activated the recording system and began documenting everything. Timestamps, frequency readings, signal strength measurements, and detailed notes about the transmission characteristics. If this turned out to be enemy communications, the intelligence value could be enormous. She spent the next hour carefully tuning and retuning the radio, trying to improve the clarity of the intercepted transmissions. Gradually, she began to make out individual words and phrases. The language appeared to be a dialect she wasn't familiar with, but certain technical terms and numeric references suggested military content. The breakthrough came at 0247 hours. Sarah had been experimenting with different antenna configurations when suddenly the signal cleared dramatically. What had been barely audible whispers in the static became clear. Distinct voices speaking in what she now recognized as a regional dialect used by known hostile forces in the area. The conversation was brief but chilling. Two voices discussing coordinates, timing, and what sounded like target designations. Sarah's limited knowledge of the language wasn't sufficient to understand every word, but the context was unmistakable. These were enemy forces planning some kind of operation, and the coordinates they were discussing were uncomfortably close to Allied positions. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She continued recording while simultaneously preparing to alert her superiors. The discovery of enemy communications required immediate escalation through proper channels, but she also needed to gather as much intelligence as possible before the transmission ended. The voices continued for another 10 minutes, during which Sarah managed to record several exchanges that included geographic references, numerical codes that might represent unit designations or equipment numbers, and time references that suggested the operation was planned for the immediate future. When the transmission finally ended, Sarah found herself staring at the radio in stunned silence. In 8 months of routine communications monitoring, she had never encountered anything like this. The implications were staggering. Not only had she discovered evidence of enemy activity, but the timing and location references suggested an immediate threat to Allied forces in the region. She quickly began transcribing everything she had heard and recorded, knowing that intelligence analysts would need detailed information to properly assess the threat. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote, the magnitude of her discovery beginning to sink in. This wasn't just another routine shift monitoring radio traffic. She had potentially uncovered intelligence that could save lives and affect the outcome of ongoing operations. The rain continued to pound against the bunker walls as Sarah prepared to make the most important radio call of her military career. The quiet voice in the distortion had revealed something that would change everything. And she was the only person who knew about it. As she reached for the secure telephone to contact her commanding officer, Sarah realized that her grandfather's lessons about radio operators being detectives had taken on a whole new meaning. Tonight, she wasn't just monitoring communications. She had become the first line of defense against an enemy scheme that could have devastating consequences if left unchecked. The green glow of the vacuum tube seemed brighter now, casting sharper shadows as Sarah prepared to transform her discovery into actionable intelligence. The storm outside was beginning to subside, but inside the bunker, a different kind of tempest was about to begin. The intelligence unfolds. The secure phone felt heavy in Sarah's hands as she dialed the emergency contact number for Major Harrison, her commanding officer. The digital clock showed 0312 hours, and she knew she was about to wake him from what was probably much-needed sleep. But the content of the intercepted transmissions left no room for delay. The phone rang twice before Harrison's gruff voice answered. "Major Harrison, this better be important, Martinez." "Sir." "This is Lieutenant Martinez at Communications Station Alpha. I have an urgent situation requiring immediate attention. I've intercepted what appears to be enemy communications containing operational intelligence." The line went silent for a moment before Harrison responded, his voice now fully alert. "Are you certain about this, Lieutenant? What exactly did you hear?" Sarah took a deep breath and began her report. "Sir, at approximately 0247 hours, I detected structured voice transmissions embedded in atmospheric interference on frequency 7. The speakers were using a regional dialect consistent with known hostile forces, and they were discussing coordinates, timing, and what appeared to be target designations. Have you recorded these transmissions?" "Yes, sir. I have complete recordings and detailed logs. The coordinates they mentioned are within 15 kilometers of forward operating base Delta, and the timing references suggest an operation planned for the next 24 to 48 hours. Major Harrison was quiet for several seconds, and Sarah could hear him moving around, probably getting dressed. "Lieutenant, I want you to secure all your recordings and prepare a detailed report. I'm contacting intelligence immediately and will be at your location within 30 minutes. Under no circumstances are you to discuss this with anyone else until I arrive." "Understood, sir. And Martinez, good work. Stay alert and keep monitoring that frequency." The line went dead, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of her discovery. She immediately began preparing comprehensive documentation of everything she had observed. The training she had received in intelligence gathering protocols now proved invaluable, as she organized timestamps, frequency data, signal characteristics, and translations of the intercepted conversations. As she worked, Sarah continued monitoring the radio equipment, hoping to capture additional transmissions. The frequency that had carried the enemy communications was now silent, except for normal atmospheric noise. But she maintained careful watch in case the hostile forces resumed their conversations. 25 minutes later, she heard vehicles approaching the bunker. Major Harrison arrived with Captain Walsh from the intelligence section and Staff Sergeant Kim, a linguist specializing in regional dialects. The three men descended into the bunker with serious expressions, bringing with them additional recording equipment and analysis tools. "Talk me through exactly what happened," Major Harrison said without preamble. Sarah provided a detailed chronological account of her shift, explaining how she had first noticed the unusual interference patterns and the methodical process she had used to isolate and clarify the hidden transmissions. Captain Walsh took extensive notes while Staff Sergeant Kim examined her recordings with professional interest. "The technical work here is exceptional," Captain Walsh commented as he reviewed Sarah's signal analysis documentation. "Most operators would have dismissed this as atmospheric noise and moved on. Your persistence uncovered something significant." Staff Sergeant Kim looked up from the playback equipment where he had been listening to the recorded transmissions. Lieutenant Martinez is correct about the language and content. These are definitely hostile forces, and they're discussing what appears to be a coordinated attack on multiple targets. The linguistic patterns suggest these are experienced military personnel, not irregular forces. Major Harrison studied the geographic coordinates Sarah had documented. These positions cover a wide area, but they're all within striking distance of our forward bases. If this intelligence is accurate, we could be looking at a major offensive operation. The next several hours passed in intense activity as the intelligence team worked to decode and analyze every detail of the intercepted communications. Sarah remained at her radio station, continuing to monitor for additional transmissions while providing technical support for the analysis effort. Captain Walsh had connected sophisticated decryption equipment to Sarah's radio system, allowing them to automatically scan multiple frequencies for similar transmission patterns. The technology was far more advanced than the standard equipment Sarah normally used, capable of detecting and analyzing even heavily encrypted communications. At 0630 hours, their patience was rewarded. Sarah detected another burst of transmissions on a frequency adjacent to the one where she had made her initial discovery. This time, the enemy communications were clearer and more detailed, providing additional information about the planned operation. Staff Sergeant Kim translated in real time as the enemy commanders discussed specific unit movements, equipment deployments, and coordination procedures. The picture that emerged was sobering. The hostile forces were planning a three-pronged assault designed to simultaneously attack Forward Operating Base Delta, a supply convoy route, and a reconnaissance outpost. The level of detail suggests they have excellent intelligence about our operations, Captain Walsh observed grimly. They know our patrol schedules, supply timings, and defensive positions with uncomfortable accuracy. Major Harrison was already on the secure telephone, briefing senior commanders and requesting immediate defensive measures for the threatened positions. The intelligence Sarah had uncovered was transforming military planning in real time, with units being repositioned and alert levels raised across the entire operational area. As the morning progressed, Sarah found herself at the center of an expanding intelligence operation. Additional linguists and analysts arrived to assist with the interpretation of intercepted communications, while technical specialists worked to improve signal interception capabilities across the entire frequency spectrum. The enemy forces seemed unaware that their communications had been compromised. Throughout the day, they continued transmitting operational details that provided Allied intelligence with an increasingly complete picture of the planned attack. Sarah's initial discovery had opened a window into enemy planning that intelligence officers described as unprecedented. This is the kind of breakthrough that can change the entire dynamic of a campaign, Captain Walsh explained to Sarah during a brief break in the monitoring activity. Your technical skills and attention to detail have potentially saved dozens of lives and given us a strategic advantage we never expected to have. By midday, the intelligence picture was clear enough for Allied forces to begin preparing countermeasures. Instead of simply defending against the planned attacks, military commanders decided to use their advanced knowledge to turn the enemy's own plan against them. If the hostile forces proceeded with their operation as scheduled, they would find themselves walking into carefully prepared traps. Sarah watched the tactical planning unfold with fascination and growing pride. Her discovery had not only revealed enemy intentions but had created opportunities for Allied forces to achieve decisive victories. The quiet voice in the radio static had become the foundation for a complex military operation involving hundreds of personnel and multiple units. The technical challenges of maintaining communications interception while supporting expanded operations pushed Sarah's skills to their limits. She found herself coordinating with intelligence analysts, technical specialists, and field commanders simultaneously, ensuring that critical information flowed smoothly between all the different elements involved in the developing situation. As evening approached, enemy communications revealed that the hostile forces were finalizing their preparations for the planned attacks. The timing had been confirmed for the following night, with all three assault groups scheduled to begin their movements at predetermined intervals. The enemy commanders expressed confidence in their operational security and the element of surprise they believed they possessed. Sarah couldn't help but smile grimly as she listened to the enemy's self-assured communications. If only they knew that their every word was being recorded, analyzed, and used to prepare for their reception. The advantage had shifted completely, transforming what should have been a devastating surprise attack into an opportunity for Allied forces to strike a decisive blow. Major Harrison approached her workstation as the shift change approached. "Lieutenant, I want you to know that your actions tonight represent exactly the kind of professional excellence we expect from our communications personnel. Your discovery has created opportunities that will resonate far beyond this immediate situation." "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." "No, Martinez. You went far beyond just doing your job. Most operators would have ignored that interference as background noise. Your curiosity and technical skill turned what could have been a disaster into a significant intelligence victory." As Sarah prepared her equipment for the next shift, she reflected on the extraordinary events of the past 18 hours. What had started as a routine evening of monitoring radio traffic had become a masterclass in the critical importance of technical expertise and attention to detail in military operations. The replacement operators who arrived for the night shift were briefed on the ongoing situation and the critical importance of maintaining continuous monitoring of the compromised enemy frequencies. Sarah's discovery had created an intelligence asset that would continue producing valuable information as long as the enemy forces remained unaware of their exposure. Walking up the stairs from the underground bunker, Sarah emerged into the cool evening air, feeling the weight of accomplishment mixed with anticipation. Tomorrow night would see the culmination of everything her discovery had set in motion, and she knew she would be monitoring every moment of the operation that had begun, with a quiet voice hidden in radio static. The operation unfolds. The bunker buzzed with controlled tension as Sarah arrived for what everyone knew would be the most critical shift of her career. The space that had been her quiet domain just 2 nights ago now housed additional personnel, expanded equipment, and the focused energy of an active intelligence operation. Multiple radio sets crackled with coordinated communications as Allied forces positioned themselves for the enemy's planned assault. Colonel Martinez, the base commander, had personally arrived to oversee the evening's activities. Sarah felt a strange combination of pride and nervousness as she realized that her initial discovery had grown into an operation involving senior leadership and multiple units. The quiet lieutenant who had been content monitoring routine traffic was now at the center of what intelligence officers were calling one of the most significant counterintelligence coups in recent memory. "Status report, Lieutenant," Colonel Martinez requested as Sarah settled into her familiar position at the primary monitoring station. "Sir, enemy communications remain consistent with previous patterns. They're maintaining operational security regarding specific timing, but all indicators suggest they're proceeding with the planned assault as scheduled. Latest intercepts confirm 3 assault groups moving into position, with the primary attack scheduled for 0200 hours. Captain Walsh looked up from his analysis station where multiple screens displayed real-time intelligence summaries. "Our countermeasures are fully deployed, Colonel. Forward Operating Base Delta has been reinforced and repositioned to create a killing field along the enemy's planned approach routes. The supply convoy has been replaced with decoy vehicles manned by special operations personnel, and the reconnaissance outpost has been evacuated and prepared as an observation platform for our artillery spotters." The complexity of the Allied response amazed Sarah as she listened to the coordination required to turn her intelligence discovery into effective military action. Engineers had worked around the clock to prepare defensive positions that would appear unchanged to enemy reconnaissance, while providing maximum advantage to Allied defenders. Intelligence specialists had carefully analyzed enemy communication patterns to ensure that any modifications to Allied positions wouldn't be detected through changes in radio traffic. As the evening progressed, enemy communications revealed increasing activity and preparation. Sarah's enhanced monitoring equipment picked up coordination calls between the 3 assault groups, logistics, communications regarding ammunition and equipment, and command transmissions that provided real-time insight into enemy decision-making processes. "They're confident?" Staff Sergeant Kim observed as he translated a particularly detailed conversation between enemy commanders. "The discussion includes expectations for capturing specific equipment and personnel. They believe they're achieving complete tactical surprise." Major Harrison, who had barely left the bunker since Sarah's initial discovery, monitored the developing situation with professional satisfaction. "Their confidence works in our favor. Overconfident enemies make tactical mistakes that well-prepared defenders can exploit. The first indication that enemy forces were moving came at 2,130 hours when Sarah detected mobile radio communications from positions several kilometers closer to Allied installations than previous transmissions. The enemy was maintaining communication discipline, but their movement was still detectable through subtle changes in signal characteristics and transmission timing. Movement confirmed on all three axes of advance, Sarah reported. Signal analysis indicates the primary assault group is approximately 8 kilometers from forward operating base Delta and closing steadily. Colonel Martinez activated the tactical communications network that would coordinate the Allied response. Sarah watched with fascination as her discovery triggered a carefully orchestrated defensive operation involving artillery, air support, special operations teams, and conventional infantry units. The beauty of the Allied plan lay in its deception. To enemy observers, everything would appear normal until the moment of contact. Routine patrol schedules continued unchanged. Normal radio traffic maintained expected patterns, and defensive positions remained invisible until enemy forces committed themselves to their planned assault routes. At 0145 hours, just 15 minutes before the scheduled enemy attack, Sarah intercepted communications that revealed the full scope of what Allied forces were facing. The enemy assault force was significantly larger than initial intelligence estimates had suggested, with nearly 200 personnel divided among the three attack groups. Without advance warning, such a coordinated assault could have achieved devastating results. "Thank God for your attention to detail 2 nights ago," Captain Walsh commented as the latest intelligence estimates appeared on his display. "This would have been a disaster if they had achieved surprise." The first contact occurred at exactly 0200 hours, when the primary enemy assault group moved into the prepared killing zone around forward operating base Delta. Sarah monitored enemy communications as confusion and panic replaced the confident coordination that had characterized their previous transmissions. "They're trying to understand what went wrong," Staff Sergeant Kim, translated as, "Enemy voices filled with stress and alarm," came through the radio speakers. "The commanders are attempting to reorganize, but their planned approach routes have become death traps." Allied artillery, precisely positioned based on the intelligence Sarah had provided, began delivering devastating fire on enemy positions. The enemy forces found themselves caught in carefully prepared crossfires, their escape routes blocked by special operations teams who had been inserted during the previous night. The second and third assault groups, hearing the sounds of battle from the primary attack, attempted to modify their plans and provide support, but Allied commanders had anticipated this possibility, and additional forces were positioned to intercept enemy reinforcements before they could affect the primary engagement. Sarah found herself in the unique position of monitoring both Allied coordination communications and enemy distress calls simultaneously. The contrast was striking. Allied transmissions remained calm and professional as predetermined plans unfolded with precision, while enemy communications revealed increasing desperation as their carefully planned operation collapsed into chaos. "Assault Group 2 is attempting to withdraw," Sarah reported, as she tracked mobile enemy transmissions moving away from their original objectives. "They're requesting immediate extraction support," but the Allied response had anticipated this possibility as well. Attack helicopters, positioned based on intelligence derived from Sarah's intercepts, engaged the withdrawing enemy forces with devastating effect. What had begun as a coordinated enemy assault was rapidly becoming a complete tactical disaster for the hostile forces. By 0430 hours, the engagement was effectively concluded. Enemy communications had dwindled to scattered distress calls from isolated survivors attempting to escape the operational area. Allied forces had achieved a decisive victory with minimal casualties, having turned the enemy's own plan into a comprehensive trap. Colonel Martinez approached Sarah's station as the immediate crisis subsided and damage assessment began. "Lieutenant Martinez, I want you to understand the significance of what your discovery accomplished. Intelligence estimates suggest that without advance warning, tonight's assault could have resulted in over 50 Allied casualties and the potential loss of forward operating base Delta. Instead, we've achieved a decisive tactical victory that will significantly impact enemy capabilities in this region." The numbers were sobering. Preliminary reports indicated that Allied forces had eliminated or captured over 150 enemy personnel, while suffering only minor wounds among their own troops. The enemy's operational planning, revealed through Sarah's intercepts, had provided the foundation for one of the most successful defensive operations in the unit's history. Captain Walsh began the process of analyzing captured enemy communications equipment and documents to extract additional intelligence that could prevent similar attacks in the future. The operation had not only defeated an immediate threat, but had provided insights into enemy capabilities and planning methods that would benefit Allied operations for months to come. As dawn broke over the communications bunker, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with her curiosity about unusual radio interference. Her grandfather's lessons about radio operators being detectives had proven prophetic in ways she never could have imagined. The quiet voice in the static had indeed disclosed an enemy scheme, but more than that, it had demonstrated the critical importance of technical expertise, professional curiosity, and attention to detail in military operations. Major Harrison, exhausted but satisfied with the night's results, paused at Sarah's workstation before heading to his debriefing meetings. "You know, Lieutenant, there's an old saying that the difference between success and failure often comes down to someone doing their job just a little bit better than expected. What you accomplished represents exactly that principle in action." Staff Sergeant Kim, packing up his translation equipment, added his own perspective. "In all my years of intelligence work, I've rarely seen a single discovery have such immediate and decisive impact. Your technical skills and professional instincts created opportunities that will be studied and remembered for years to come." As the expanded operations team began departing the bunker, Sarah found herself alone once again with the familiar array of radio equipment that had been her domain for 8 months. But everything had changed. The routine monitoring of communications traffic now carried new significance, and her understanding of the critical role played by communications personnel had been transformed by direct experience. The green glow of the vacuum tube seemed different now, casting light on equipment that had proven its worth in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Sarah's quiet corner of the military's vast communications network had become the foundation for a victory that would resonate throughout the entire campaign. She settled into her chair and began the routine equipment checks that started every shift. But now she understood that there was nothing truly routine about the work she performed. Somewhere in the radio spectrum, other quiet voices might be waiting to disclose their secrets to an operator with the skill and curiosity to find them. Sarah was ready for whatever the airwaves might reveal next. The morning sun streamed through the bunker's small windows as Sarah completed her post-operation reports, knowing that her name would be associated with one of the most successful intelligence operations in recent memory. The quiet voice in the distortion had changed everything, and she had been the one listening when it mattered most.